welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. Today, my very special guest is Mr. Matt Hudak, who is a former deputy chief of the Border Patrol. How you doing, sir?
Very good, DV. Good to be on the show with you today. Thank you.
No, thank you for coming on. And you would know best, there is a major problem at the border and how we're doing immigration. And I definitely want to dig in and talk about your experiences about that. But first, I'd like for you to introduce yourself to my audience.
Okay. Again, thanks for the opportunity to be here on the show with you. My name is Matthew Hudak, and proud to say that we're now Ellis County residents here. As DV said, I retired as the deputy chief of the U.S. Border Patrol last December, and we made our way back here to Texas and settled here in Ellis County. It's great to be part of this community. Got an opportunity to meet a bunch of great people, but really an opportunity to move into a new world here after serving a little over 26 years with the Border Patrol. I started as a frontline agent down in South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. Went out to Arizona as a supervisor for several years, Washington, D.C., back to the Laredo sector, a couple of stations there, served as a station commander, division chief, went to Del Rio sector here in Texas as the deputy chief, served as the acting chief for a couple of years, chief in the Big Bend sector, back to Laredo as chief, before going up to DC as the deputy chief about 3 years ago. That's the story in a nutshell.
Wow, that is a lot of traveling within the Border Patrol and going to different stations. So I imagine you got well-rounded and seen just about everything in those many years from 97, you said, when you started off, right?
Yeah, that's right. I had the opportunity to work in a lot of great places with a lot of awesome teams. And the positions I've had, also the opportunity to travel extensively along the northern border, our coastal border, and also with our international partners. It was a great mission and just a great group of people to work with.
How's retirement treating you?
It's nice. I've adjusted to not getting phone calls through the night and having to deal with all the things that a very large law enforcement agency and its leadership has to, and really just happy to be here and enjoying a little bit more quiet and a lot more family time.
That sounds great. I got 3 years till I get there, and I'm counting down the minutes. I can't wait to get there, definitely. But there's a lot. I wanted to talk to you about the border. There's so many different angles you can hit this problem with the border. But I'm going to try to cover some good ones for the people who are watching. So what would you say, because immigration has been a problem or has been an issue, like the last time there was major changes to immigration was probably Reagan in 86. And then I believe there was something in the 90s that happened, but that's the last time. But how did is that system antiquated? How did it help you and hinder you or your agents in doing their job of a Border Patrol agent?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great question, TV. And the short answer is absolutely the system that we have now is antiquated. I know I've heard people refer to it as broken, and in many ways, that's probably pretty accurate. So you're right. IMACT 86 and 96, IRCA, those were the last real substantive changes to the immigration acts under Title 8. And what situation that really creates for us right now is, as those laws and statutes were put into place, there were avenues in there for people that did arrive at this country, even illegally, to be able to seek asylum and refugee status, particularly for escaping persecution from state actors in other parts of the world. What has ended up happening over the years is smuggling organizations and just using social media and technology, people around the world have identified and advertised what those loopholes are. Just about any migrant that was arriving last couple of years at our southern border illegally, after they made that entry, they were invoking that asylum process. And what that really ends up doing is kind of putting the regular, enter illegally, be arrested, and be returned to your country process that can, in an expedited removal, happen relatively quickly. It really brings that to a screeching halt. So nothing can proceed with a removal or an immigration case at the border. They have to then get scheduled to go through an asylum hearing with an asylum officer, see an immigration judge, and that's where they get the notices to appear. And those court dates, the interviews have to take place within a short period of time, but oftentimes their immigration judge hearings can be 2, 3, 4 years down the road.
We saw and more in the lines of this because this parole issue is the one that I like to bring up because something changed. You would see that these people came in and they were asking for stuff or asking for asylum, and they had these big crowds and it was making the news and everything, and then all of a sudden these crowds went away.
Yeah.
What I've read, like everybody else, is that we're paroling more than we did before. What changed between, let's say, the Trump administration and now with the way that they parole or detain, or what changed?
Yeah, simple in some contexts, but it's a very complicated situation in other ways. And I try to make it a little bit simpler. It's easier for me to understand as well. And in the way to really describe that contrast, one of the things under the Trump administration that everybody probably has heard of is the Remain in Mexico policy. And what that basically meant was if you transited through a third country, so if you're from, if you say Guatemala, for example, and you transit through Mexico, you went through a safe country. You had the opportunity to seek asylum, ask for help there, but you didn't. You came to this country, but you came through Mexico. It was an agreement with Mexico in which Border Patrol was able to arrest and detain those people and then promptly return them back to Mexico to wait in Mexico before their hearing date with an immigration judge. And what a lot of folks don't know is a lot of money was spent to stand up temporary immigration courts along the southern border. So those people that went to Mexico maybe waited for a month or two before coming back for that hearing. So it was a very expedited process, but they were required to wait in Mexico for that hearing. So what that did is sent a message, and you have to remember all of this happens in real time through social media. 25 years ago, 6 years ago, when I started, that wasn't a thing. But now, as we were detaining people, returning them to Mexico, they're telling their friends and family through social media, email, text, whatever, that, hey, we made it, but they sent us back to Mexico and we have to sit here and wait for a couple of months. So that sent a message that, hey, this is not an easy process. And that quickly drove down the numbers of illegal entries that we were seeing. So then you fast forward to the start of the Biden administration. Day one of those executive orders was suspending that process. So what immediately started happening is now you had large volumes of people entering illegally across the southern border. And now they're getting here, they're claiming asylum, they're invoking kind of those loopholes that I mentioned. And there really there's no mechanism because limited detention space from ICE ERO. There's not an opportunity to hold them. They've invoked an asylum process that requires a hearing before they can be removed. So there is no other option other than releasing them pending their court date. What then became complicated and where the parole comes into place is that kind of quickly encountering people and then having to release them, that social media feedback and that electronic feedback back to those countries. Now you had 2 times, 3 times, 4 times as many people coming to the southern border because the message was clear. If you get here, you're going to be released and you'll be in the country. You'll be detained for a day or two, but you'll be on your way. Those numbers got so overwhelming, and we're talking 5, 6, 7, 8,000 encounters per day, that just there were not the resources to spend the 2 or 3 hours per migrant to go through all of that case processing. So the parole was really a tool that's been around for a while and really was used to say, okay, we're going to vet you through the systems that we can. We're going to do the best we can at the time. But all of those couple of hours of just filling out the forms and doing that stuff, we'll have you report somewhere else and we'll do that later, just because there was no physical way to manage that high volume of people at the border. So that's how what had been turned into what became, and then why parole came in for the short time that it was there. That's what it was used for, is really just a pressure relief valve when Border Patrol stations and sectors were just overwhelmed with detainees.
Do you think, and this is where the post retirement you comes in, do you think, from what you've seen and so many years that you were at the Border Patrol, that some of this stuff was intentional?
I think part of it was um, a little bit of ignorance to the reality. I think there was any administration, they bring in a lot of appointees and staff comes in. We know a lot of the staff that came into this administration were from immigrant support organizations, NGOs, and others. And I think there was a very idealistic view of the border and migration. And nobody sought input from the agents and the folks that actually know how things work on the border. So I think there was just this knee jerk reaction of let's turn all these things off. We don't like the sound of them. And they quickly found that, oh, shoot, we created a situation that has spun out of control. And then we went through, obviously, a very extended period of time where we were prohibited from using the word crisis because there was no acknowledgement of what was happening up until the point that it really started showing up on people's doorsteps that there was a need to confront the issue.
As a leader sitting in that position, and your agents are telling you through chain of command, but they're telling you, hey boss, this is messed up, I can't do my job this way. When you're sitting there at the upper levels, how are those conversations going? I know that there's stuff you can't disclose, obviously, but just give me an idea, a feeling of how those discussions were going with those leaders above you.
Yeah, I had the opportunity, part of my job, as much time as I can, get out to the field, talk to our agents in the different sectors, and there was no surprise. I prided myself on being able to get candid feedback from our agents. They were angry, they were upset, they were let down, they felt betrayed, and I think that's partially true. I think that they had every right to have that feeling. Me and others, we certainly communicated that sentiment up. But this is one of those where, hey, we've determined our policy and it's your job as agency leadership to execute that policy. And then the focus really became how do we support the Border Patrol in mitigating the scale of this crisis? What resources do you need to get people from the border out in the desert into these soft side temporary facilities to get them air conditioned? To what tools do you need to get them processed faster, to get them released faster? Those types of things. The focus really was not how do we stop this flow, but it was how do we facilitate it and make it easier. And that was extremely frustrating for our agents. And it really came down to just if your haystack is that big, how do you find the needle in it? And that's the part that's really unsettling.
So would you say that politics and optics trumped everything? Don't, no pun intended, but it was the most important thing. Did that become the end of your career, basically, when you what you were seeing, where it was just about politics and optics instead of actually protecting us on our border and doing the border patrol mission?
Yeah, it was. And it's very difficult to reconcile those two. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that there were folks in the Biden administration that I talked to that I think genuinely were concerned and understand the security risks that we were concerned about. They were in that spot of just, okay, what can we do to mitigate those risks as much as possible, but we're not gonna change policy. That's I think the frustrating part. And I looked at my job as really how do I take us and the senior leaders, how do you take that policy agenda and make it work within the context of the mission that you have to do? And part of that is just how do you go out there and tell agents, hey, I get it, I'm with you, I feel the same concern, but this is the way the government is set up. If that's the policy and it's within law and it's within the bounds of the regulations, we'll implement that policy and we'll do it the best we can. But we're not going to compromise on security. We're not going to put our agents and our communities at risk. We're going to do the best job we can, regardless of policy trying to change that.
When I had the vice president of the Border Patrol Council on, Ardell Cueto, when I had him on the show, great show. I hope you guys will watch it. But we went through a lot of the things that were going on the border, and you had a 30,000 foot view of this, also a very close view. It sounds like you were in there. So what we were talking about at that time was how the cartels were involved in this. So I want you to go into what happened and how the cartel has transformed from they're still doing the drugs big time, but they've turned into a human smuggling conglomerate. And can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, to put it simply, the policies the last couple of years under the Biden administration have enriched the cartels beyond any imaginable number. This has been a total boon market for the cartels and smuggling organizations the last few years to a scale we haven't seen before. And you mentioned certainly throughout my career, drug smuggling was certainly something that we were concerned about. And we always had the ability to address illegal immigration and drug smuggling, weapons smuggling, whatever it may be. We always seem to have enough resources to address all of those threats. The last couple of years, just with the overwhelming numbers, when you talk about over 2 million encounters a year, something has to give. And the ability to counter drug smuggling and other things really gets put at risk when you're having to deal with just a overwhelming sea of humanity. And the challenge with that is all of those people that are crossing the border illegally in some way that they're paying somebody for that. There's smuggling organizations that may not be putting them in the trunks of vehicles, but they're arranging the buses. They're arranging to move them through Mexico, through their native countries, through Mexico to the southern border. They're getting paid to smuggle them across the Rio Grande River, through the desert, whatever the case may be. So they're making money doing that. Even in these cases where they seek asylum and they turn themselves in after release, those organizations are oftentimes still involved with helping them find a job, helping them get set up in areas they're going to. And this human smuggling really becomes the gateway for human trafficking, which is a whole other just horrible chapter to be able to talk about. But all of those proceeds, that was money going into these cartels. Whatever area of the border, it's a different cartel organization, but they're making money. And oftentimes they're making more money through human smuggling than they were through drugs. But at the same time, Border Patrol and border agencies are overwhelmed with this huge volume of migrants. It opens up avenues for more drug smuggling. So they're making more money through alien smuggling, and now they even have more opportunity for drug smuggling because law enforcement is busy. So in both ways, it really became just a total market and windfall for the cartels.
Do the drug cartels own our border? Do they have operational control of our border?
So I have to say they do not on this side of the border, but absolutely no doubt they do on the Mexican side of the border. And that's a challenge. They have the ability to approach and transit and move around the border in Mexico generally without constraint. So challenges us to be very agile and dynamic on our side of the border. But there's certainly areas where they have advantages that we try to play catch up to. But in more areas than not, we try to keep that advantage. But it's a very tenuous balance.
Did the government of Mexico ever try to help the United States on that?
In some ways, I think we understand. I think everybody's familiar with some of the challenges in Mexico. And when you have cartels that are based in some of the larger city border areas and they're making millions of dollars a day, they have ability to yield a lot of influence. And that really allows them to do things the way they want. And understandably, we've seen when we look at Juarez, Nuevo Laredo, some other areas, we see the tactics that they use to keep the government of Mexico out of their business. And understandably, that's very challenging for Mexico to deal with. Mexico has, and they remain good partners to the extent that I think they can, but understand it's a very uphill battle for them.
there there were situations where like Governor Abbott was trying to put Connex boxes and razor wire and different things that try to stem a flow. Is that something that you guys could have done in your own right, like maybe as Border Patrol agents putting some kind of barriers up, extra barriers or something up to stem the flow, or at least curve it into one direction? Is that something you guys were doing?
Yeah, so we were doing that in certain areas, understanding the southern border is almost 2,000 miles long. So it's a challenging undertaking for us, even as the federal government. But there are certainly areas, El Paso was one that was getting really saturated with illegal migration coming in from Juarez, Mexico, Venezuelans, and others from outside of Mexico. And there we did have to use fencing and other things just to really try to contain and control that a little bit. But one thing my experience does show me is there's no singular fix to the issue. And when we look at the border, we certainly had been, I think we deployed over 400 miles of border wall system. And it is the fencing, that's part of it, but it's also the patrol roads so agents can access the border, respond to illegal entries, the camera systems, the sensor systems to detect it. But the challenge is you build a wall, and if that section of wall is 10 miles long, at mile 10.2 is where people will be crossing. It is challenging to do that, but yes, you can use physical barriers just like you do at large public events and things like that. You can direct things a little bit using it.
Border barriers, that was a big, and politicians jump on it for political points, one way or the other. And border barriers, talk to me about what happened when the Biden administration came into office with the border barriers. What ended up happening with all those supplies and the contracts and all that? What happened there?
Yeah, probably a troubling story there for a lot of Americans. But at the time, I was chief in the Laredo sector. We were one of the sectors that had been appropriated by Congress a pretty significant amount of funding to deploy the border barrier system. And again, that's the fencing with the patrol roads, the lighting, the cameras, the sensors. It's what Border Patrol asked for a full suite of infrastructure along the border. Work was already going on, surveys, agreements with landowners, and was really going to help us reshape the security of that area. And again, stroke of a pen, those projects were all suspended. And all that money that was allocated was sitting there tied up with it. And it obviously took several years for even some of that to get resolved. But in the meantime, miles and miles of steel had already been purchased and was literally left on the ground rusting. All of the work that we had done to get ready for some of those barrier systems was completely put on hold. And the way that it was appropriated, we could not do one part of it. It had to be the complete system. So even if, okay, no more wall construction, no more fence construction, can we proceed with the patrol roads and cameras? No. So all of that was completely stopped. All that money just ended up sitting there. Those materials were wasted, and we really did not move forward with any border infrastructure efforts, minus a couple of just repair and immediate safety issues.
I want to go back to OTMs. You were saying other than Mexicans that were coming in. Can you talk about the different countries you were seeing? Because Art was talking about from the Islamic Mediterranean something. I'm sorry, I don't know the name, folks. That was a little long of a name, but that we had so many different people coming in. Matt, do we really know who these people were and how did we account for them?
Yeah, so probably referring to the Mauritanians, but yeah, so even throughout my career, we would see people every year. The Border Patrol would encounter people from upwards of 180 countries. If it's a country, we probably would see some people from it. And obviously, Mexico was always the largest number. The Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, those are the ones we would see probably moving down in order. And then as you moved outside of the continent, the numbers would go down, and you'd have Eritrea and some of these other countries, maybe one or two people. What we saw, again, with really this kind of global signal that the border, I know the semantics are somewhat ridiculous to me, but referring to the border as open. And I think the message to people, hey, yeah, you're going to get detained, but you're going to be released within a day or two and you'll be on your way. That border is effectively open. And that message got around the world very quickly. We started to see significant increases in encounters everywhere from China to the Middle Eastern countries, Mauritania, Eritrea, other countries, you name it. We saw those numbers going up because, again, the signal that was out there in the world was, hey, if you want to go, now is the time to go. And smuggling organizations totally capitalized on that effort. And really, in a way, they moved from being a smuggling organization to really a transit organization, because the way of getting across the border just literally changed overnight. So there were opportunities for people from all these other countries that maybe didn't have that access to travel to the US. There were organizations that were facilitating that. And again, particularly when we look at some countries that we know we tend to see more get victimized in terms of human trafficking, this overnight created a huge market for that. If you're in an Eastern European country or another country and you want to come to the US, but you don't have the funds to do it, these organizations will do it for you on credit. And what that credit turns into on this end is servitude and human trafficking. And we would see females, children become victims of sex trafficking here, indentured servitude, forced labor, garnished wages, you name it. That's the human trafficking end of it that we would see here in the US.
Talk to me about that human trafficking part, because I think that sometimes, and I don't think the media always paints a picture, and in the United States we don't like to talk about the ugly on the media. Somebody died, but it's blurred out, it's nothing. Some of the media's on the other world, they report it as it is, body on the ground, etc. Talk to me about what people don't know was happening to females, to children along that border.
Yeah, what most people don't know, and I think it's worth just public service here, take a minute and describe the difference between human smuggling and human trafficking. Human smuggling is the act where in the case of a migrant, is a willing participant in that event. In that event, they pay a smuggler to smuggle them across the Rio Grande River, get them into a stash house. They're a willing participant in that conspiracy. Human trafficking is often and generally when it crosses from I'm doing this voluntarily to now I don't have a choice. And it's usually when the smuggling part of it is completed, now they're told by this organization, hey, we told you $5,000 to get you here. Thanks. But we had to do all these other things. Now you owe us another $10,000 and I don't have the money to pay that. Okay, here's how you can work this off. You're going to work for this bar as a waitress. They're going to pay us and we'll work off your debt that way. They hold their immigration documents, they hold their freedom, they restrict their movement, and they're really not free to move outside of that. And oftentimes there's the threats of force that are applied to that. And that's really, again, like you said, it's something that people don't really want to think about. But there's huge numbers of people here in this country right now that are the victims of human trafficking. And we saw just recently in the media some cases where large, significant arrests take place and really from identifying human trafficking victims. And those are anything from forced prostitution for females and children to, like I said, the forced labor where they're forced to go do a job, but they're not getting wages to do that. It's really it's sad to know that's happening under most people's eyes.
What story sticks with you the most, Matt? The one that really haunts you. What really haunts you about it?
Yeah. So with our role, we were dealing with people at the border. We obviously worked with HSI under ICE and local agencies to work these cases whenever we could identify them in the initial stages. But like I said, we've seen cases around the media where large numbers of women subjected to prostitution, and they didn't ask for that. They came here looking for a job. They wanted to do legitimate work, and that now they end up victims. And in those cases, we saw often enough. I think the more troubling things that we saw day to day were small children, women, some younger women, even women with children would get encountered, by our agents after making that entry, and they would require medical attention because they had been raped by smugglers or even people that were in the group with them. And again, they didn't ask for that. They thought they were safe in the hands of smugglers, and they didn't realize the fact that they're engaging with criminals to do this. And we just hear those stories, and it was not a rare occurrence. That it happened pretty frequently, just what they went through just because they were trying to get here to get a job or even get here to reunite with family. But yeah, very often you heard cases of of rape, sexual assault. Robbery was, almost a given, that they would be robbed along the way. There was a notable case in San Diego back in February. Migrants were being robbed by smuggling organizations. It, there's no end to it, unfortunately.
And I could imagine and I've heard some stories and from Border Patrol agents. It is that is the tragic part of it.
It is, and
That is the tragic part of it, that they're humans. They're
they're
people,
people.
regardless of immigration policy, which we can go on for 30 years talking about that, and they have. But there's actual people down there. There's actual human beings that are being trafficked, that are being slaved, that are going through all that, and it's not something that really gets talked about or nobody wants to hear. It's too much for their ears to hear. If you were, and before I start closing out, if you were, if you, Matt Hudak, could change something right now to make everything better, unilaterally, that you can go up there and change something, what would you do, or what would you like to do to get this border under control?
I think, simply put, it starts with consequences. If you look at any criminal justice, the study of criminal justice and criminal behavior, it's pretty easy to tell if there's no consequence, you cannot shape behavior. You need to be able to deliver consequences to shape behavior. And like I said, the message right now for the last couple of years has been there really is little to no consequence to coming to this country and crossing the border and entering illegally. So I think the first thing that you have to do is you need to establish that security is a fundamental requirement. And to be able to, I think, even move forward with any substantive immigration reform, you have to be able to start with a foundation of security. And what that takes is maybe taking some of the billions of dollars that we're spending per year for these soft side facilities to be able to do temporary processing and put that into actual detention space. So that I'm fully for and support the requirement for due process, absolutely, but let's deliver that due process. So if somebody enters the country illegally, whether it's a single adult male or a family, have that capacity to be able to humanely detain and hold them through their hearing process. And if due process is provided to them and an immigration judge believes that they fall into a category that qualifies, then they're allowed to enter. If not, then they get removed back to their country, and we're delivering a consequence. I think until we're able to shift resources that way, we're not going to change this. And words can only do so much, but it needs to be that congruency between words and actions. And right now, the two don't match.
Before I give you the last word to close out, I wanted to ask you to do something because you did it the other night, and I thought it was telling. Is it the Border Patrol's agent's fault? The agent working on the border right now, is it their fault? Are they just letting people willy-nilly? Do they not care?
No, absolutely not. And as I said the other night, I want to be clear that the situation on the border is absolutely not the fault of a Border Patrol agent, officer, an ICE employee. This is strictly a effective policy. They are bound by law to act with the orders as long as they fall within the law. They're lawful and moral orders. They are required to do that. So it is not on them at all. And I don't want anybody misplacing any blame for the situation. And if anything, I think if the law allowed you to have a candid conversation with any Border Patrol agent or others, they would tell you that, hey, we do not want to be releasing people. We want to detain them. Yes, let them have their court date, but let's do that in the proper way and not create a loophole that gets exploited millions of times over per year. So I do, and I think that's something that gets lost in some of this when we look at those numbers, just the unbelievable work that, and I can speak to Border Patrol, of course, but the tremendous work done by those men and women every single day. Last year, fiscal year 2023, over 27,000 rescues done by Border Patrol agents. Those are people that most likely would have died or faced serious bodily injury had not been for the intervention and rescue from a Border Patrol agent. Anybody that speaks ill of them, I take issue with, because they're men and women that are out there saving lives every day. They're doing a hard job, and unfortunately, it's been a lot harder the last couple of years.
On my show, Matt, my guest gets the last word. So I want you to talk directly to the people of Ellis County and beyond, and just give them what you got to say.
Thanks, DV, and again, appreciate the opportunity. And I think, just like I said a little bit the other night, wherever you politically fall on the spectrum, certainly everybody has the right to be wherever they are. But I think that needs to be a decision based on fact. And I think it's very difficult to weed fact out of what you often hear in the news clips. Sound bites are dangerous. They're the fool's bait. You got to look into the story and learn a little bit about it. And that's why I appreciate everybody listening tonight. But the reality of it is, the border, even if you don't live in Webb County, Hidalgo County, Brewster County here in Texas, or San Diego County, the border affects you. If it's not migrants or the smuggling organizations or the human trafficking, it's the billions of dollars that are being spent right now to mitigate the effects of these huge numbers of illegal entries. And those billions of dollars, I'm concerned about as a taxpayer, because I think there's other things that we can be doing about it and doing with that money. And at the same time, seeing cartels and criminal organizations on both sides of the border profiting from it is troubling, because those are going to be problems we're going to be dealing with. Criminal organizations, gangs, we're going to be dealing with those problems for years to come.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking with me. I do appreciate your time. Can you stick around after the show real quick?
Yes, sir. Thank you.